I love the irony of going for a bike ride on a hot Florida morning while wearing an Alaska jersey. Well, at least it's bright and they can see me, and my wife is appreciative of that. But while I was riding, I was thinking about Paul when he says that physical exercise profits the body, does, but godliness profits everything. It is supremely good for us, profitable. And as I was thinking about that, it encouraged me to get off the bike and come straight in here because I really want to talk to you about the Gospel of Luke. This is an introductory video, and most of us know roughly about Luke. He was a doctor. He was a companion to Paul. He heard Paul preach a lot, presumably, and yet when he writes his gospel, he doesn't write it as theology like Paul would do. No, he approaches it in a very Greek or Gentile way when he writes essentially a biography heavily influenced by the way that the Greeks presented biographies. So the first thing I want you to think about is that Luke is a creature of his culture. His Greek was the best. Of all the biblical writers, he was superb. And so his books, the Gospel according to Luke and Acts, are good to read, sometimes hard to read in Greek. So when he's writing his gospel, it is in a way different than you or I would write it today. In the ancient times, the Greeks were of an opinion, let's just say it that way, that a person's personality never changed from birth to death. And so they were not concerned with chronology per se. They felt very comfortable in taking stories from your early life or your late life, putting them together because they were trying to make a point about that person. So it didn't matter when the story occurred if it supported their point. And so we see this play itself out in Luke's gospel. For example, he might tell stories that are in the other two synoptic gospels, Matthew and Mark, but he might put them in a different order. Why? Because he's trying to make a point. And what's interesting about Luke's writing is that you don't really read it from the theology of Paul. It's written differently. It is a masterwork, a literary masterpiece. Luke is trying to make points about Jesus, and he puts the stories together that best make his points. Therefore, you have to read all of the stories in context. How do they relate to that which came before? How do they relate to that which comes afterwards? For example, the calling of the 12 is different in Luke than Matthew, for example. It happens immediately after Jesus confronts the Pharisees in a synagogue, healing on the Sabbath day. And as soon as he does that, they are so upset that they really start to figure out what are they going to do about this man. And it says immediately Jesus went up on the mountain to pray, and as he's coming down, he calls the 12. He names 12 out of his coterie of disciples. He chooses 12. Some might say that those are related and that the calling of the 12 is symbolic of the new covenant, that he's starting over in the new covenant, starting over with 12 new patriarchs, so to speak. If you'll notice, Luke never says anything about which tribe the 12 come from. And so as we look in videos to come, we will see how these stories are cobbled together to preach of the coming of the kingdom of God brought by Jesus I look forward to seeing you again soon.